All right.
Hey everyone, Jai Janendra. I'm Anjali Doshi. I am YJ's current Director of Education. And in honor of Mental Health Awareness Month in May, we are doing a webinar today on mental health in the Jain and in general, the South Asian community. And we have some great guest speakers, which I will briefly introduce. So first we have Pooja Mehta,
Hi.
is she's a recent Duke grad from North Carolina and a member of the Jain community who's been very actively advocating to change the way we think about and deal with mental illness for the past 3 years. So thanks, Pooja, for joining. We also have with us Ramey Ko, who is a partner with the law firm of Jung Co. PLLC, and he also teaches in the MBA program at UT Austin. And he's been a speaker on student activism and more recently mental health and wellness for the past 3 YJ conventions. So thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. And we also have Amit Shah, who is a former YJ board member from Chicago. And most recently, he was co-chair of the 2016 LA convention, so many of you might remember him. And currently, he's a student, and he's been speaking about mental health at YJ conventions since 2012. So thank you guys so much for joining. We're looking forward to a great discussion today. Just briefly, a few logistical things in advance. So we've had a Google form available for questions to be submitted in advance, and we're going to be answering a bunch of those. But if you want to submit any questions during the webinar, that Google form will be checked, so you can still use that. And someone can post that link in the chat. And I believe it's also on the Facebook event page. And if you have any questions that you want to post in just the webinar's chat box itself, feel free to do that, and we'll look out for those. And if there are any questions that we don't get to during the webinar itself today, not only will this webinar be recorded and posted at the YJ website, but also the slides. We will upload the slides with the full answers, and we'll also make sure to cover any questions we didn't get to during the webinar itself in the written out slides. So those will be answered. And just a quick disclaimer, none of us is a professional, and all of our discussion here will represent our own opinions, experiences, and ideas. If I misrepresent a Jain principle, I want to say Michhami Dukram in advance. And if you are experiencing any kind of crisis or difficulty right now, we will have some resources listed at the end with qualified professionals for you to get in touch with. And with all of that said, our guest speakers are going to start by sharing their stories, and then we'll dive into the discussion. So I think the first one is Pooja, based on the slides, I think.
Okay, so hi everybody. Thank you, Anjali, for that introduction. So my name is Pooja. I am 21 years old, and I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. My experience with mental illness started when I was 13. I started just getting like these weird like panic attacks and just feeling very on edge all the time, compounded with very negative and like self-harming and self-hating thoughts. And I grew up thinking that this wasn't something like this wasn't normal. The way I had seen mental illness portrayed in the media or portrayed in my community, I thought I was losing it. I thought if I had told anybody, I would get locked up or like ostracized or something that, like just not, it wouldn't be a good outcome. So I kept a journal of all of these thoughts that were running through my head, everything from that I was stupid and like didn't deserve any friends to just very elaborate plans on how I should kill myself. Overall, not good. And this went on for about 3 years until my parents found this journal and decided that I needed professional help. And I was very lucky that both my parents are pharmacists, and so they were able to take this from like a very chemical based perspective and like simply sat me down and said like, this is just a chemical imbalance in your brain, like that's all it is. Took me to therapy and got me on medication, and I have been coping with I've been just fighting a path to recovery ever since. I have attempted and survived suicide 3 times for various reasons and various methods, but all going back to my disorders. And I have relapsed 3 times. So I'm currently in remission right now, which means that like if I were to walk into a therapist's office at the moment, I wouldn't qualify for a diagnosis of anxiety and depression the way I normally do, which is a good thing. But it's an ongoing battle, and I'm doing really well right now, which is a great thing. But it fluctuates, and that's completely normal, and that's something that I've had to come to terms with, and have since just tried to educate people and just tried to be someone in the community who can like speak to the realities of living with these disorders.
Thanks so much, Pooja. And thank you for sharing that story. So next, Amit is also going to share his story. And hopefully for those of you guys watching, if you've gone through anything similar, seeing this can help you know that you're not alone and there are people who can relate to what you're going through.
So Jai Jinendra, Namaskar, Salam, Kidda, Sat Sri Akal. Hello, everybody. I'm representing a lot of people from the South Asian community. I know a lot of friends are watching this who are from different backgrounds. So I want to say hi to all of you guys from all different backgrounds of life. So my story is a little similar to Pooja's, but it's a little different. So I've been battling about depression and suicide since high school, and that was around 2002. I faced a lot of bullying, faced a lot of harassment. I even had some physical violence happen to me. Personal things at home, just identity issues because being South Asian and being born in America and just Caucasian area. It wasn't really easy growing up for me because we used to live in a very Indian area and then we moved to a very Caucasian area due to my parents' business. I didn't realize I was fighting depression and suicide until later on. So I basically kept going until in high school. I was actually put into counseling by the school. So I would see a counselor weekly, which kind of helped, but it didn't really help fully because it wasn't professional enough, like almost as much as I should have. After I graduated high school, I thought things would get better for me in college. Didn't really work out that way as much as I thought it would. It helped a little in the sense that I got away from all those bullies and people in the past I had to fight with. But I kept fighting a lot. I tend to have friends who would actually never understand me. They think I'd be dramatic or overly exaggerating stuff like that. Or some friends actually were concerned, but I didn't listen to them. Due to the Indian male ego issue, it's a big thing and it's a real true thing. To not listen to some of them and would be questioning them. As well as like I tried to commit suicide a couple times when I was around like 19 to 22. I started making good friends actually and like got involved in like dance team with Bhangra team at UIC. I had friends who were supportive. I joined Indian Student Association. YJA has always been one support of my place in life, even though I've been part of it since I was like almost 16. But still, I didn't really find the pathway until about 2013. After that summer, I had something happen to me personally, and so something sparked inside me because someone said something to me, and it hit that I relapsed and went back. Instead of moving 2 steps forward, I went 3 steps back. So at that point, 2 of my best friends, who are one of them is watching, one of them isn't available at the time. They actually helped me out and got me to go onto a website to find my therapist. And I went and saw a therapist, a psychologist. I went on antidepressants. The antidepressants helped me a lot. The therapies, I'm still in therapy, to be honest with you guys, for the last 2 years now, and I'm proud of it. I'm doing so much better because of therapy. And a lot of my support from a lot of my friends and who are basically like my family, and I have some couple cousins who actually helped me too. And so in the long run, I've dealt with a lot of personal issues and struggles in my life, which caused me to go down this pathway. And that's my story in the sense that I've had some issues and now I'm getting better, and I'm better now than I was like years back. But a few regrets I did have was that I didn't do this earlier in this stage that I wish I did, because I found this out way too late in the game. And if I did it early, maybe it would have helped me stop me from doing some really stupid things in my life. But it's part of life. We learn from our mistakes and we keep moving forward from there.
Thank you so much, Amit. And now that you guys have gotten to very sort of personal stories, Ramey is going to zoom out a little and talk about these issues in sort of the wider South Asian community.
Hi everyone, Jai Jinendra. My name is Ramey Ko. Some of you may actually know me, but Some of you are probably wondering my connection with the Jain community. I am obviously not South Asian, and I am not actually a Jain. However, thanks to some luck, I met and got to be friends with a YJA board member back in 2009. When I was working a lot on political engagement and activism among young people in the Asian community, and he asked if I could come to YJA in 2010 to come speak about political organizing. I just finished running the nationwide Asian Americans for Obama organization in 2008. And so I said, I'd be happy to. And I've gone to every YJA since 2010. I presented at all of them and have had a great, great time. And starting a couple conferences ago, I started talking about mental health and having some seminars. So it's been great to have the opportunity to come and talk about it. I myself was diagnosed with bipolar 2 with anxiety disorder in 2011. So that would have been, if you can do the math, 1 year after my first YJA. So I was not someone who was aware of my own mental health diagnosis or situation in 2010. I was 31, age 11, so never too late. But this obviously opened up my eyes to a lot of issues. And for me, one of the things that this personal experience led me to do was it inspired me to become an activist on this issue and an advocate. And so in the last few years, I have done a lot of work both locally and nationally, such as my work with YJA, to try to do more to promote the issue of mental health both within our API community, that's Asian American Pacific Islander communities, reduce stigma, deal with the invisibility of the issue, bring it out of the shadows, educate people about mental health and mental wellness so that we have better understandings. And then at the same time, to advocate for better resources, better training, better policy when it comes to addressing the mental health needs of the API community, who is often marginalized, forgotten, left out of a lot of these conversations when it comes to policy, when it comes to resources and all these kinds of things. But I'm very happy to report that there's been some great progress on this front in the last few years. Starting a few years ago, we started to see a surge in interest, a lot of it coming from the community itself, start to talk about this issue. I think one of the things that catalyzed this was in 2000s, there were a couple of studies done. First time there had been really comprehensive studies done about the API population, and they came out with some pretty shocking statistics. For example, it was found that suicide was the leading cause of death, #1 among Asian American girls and young women ages 14 to 29. You can imagine suicide does not rank nearly that high for the general population with that age range. It was #3 for Asian American men and boys in that same age range. For seniors, it also ends up being a very high number as well. And so this kind of opened up a side, I think a dark side to, I think, the model minority myth that so many of us are familiar with that really opened up this idea that we need to do something about it. So some national organizations such as NAMI, et cetera, that's the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and other organizations have started to create divisions, groups, committees, et cetera, devoted to working on the API community. At the same time, we've seen the rise of organizations within the API community itself. A few years ago, there really wasn't much out there. Now there's the National American Pacific Islander Mental Health Association. There's a fantastic organization called CHAI, which is South Asian counselors helping Asian Indians, and done fantastic work. There's a division of South Asian Americans in the Asian American Psychological Association, does great stuff as well. I was privileged to join the White House President Advisory Commission on APIs under President Obama from 2010 to 2013. And when we were doing that, once I kind of came to terms with my own mental illness, I told some folks, hey, I really want to see us do some work on this. And I was really proud to see an amazing response. And so the Obama White House actually provided a lot of support. Wonderful. We hosted the first ever API mental health conference and summits at the White House starting in 2013 or so. We got Medicaid, Medicare offices, SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, in the federal government to actually start creating and devoting resources, developing action plans when it came to the API community. So now we finally are in a place where we're starting to have a little bit more infrastructure, a little bit more resources, and a little bit more actual data. Like a lot of the problems, up to this time is that nobody really studied our community separately. And so as folks here know, and the reason we're joining this call is because each community faces its own challenges. And in the South Asian American community, we see that same thing, right? And so being East Asian American, there's a lot of commonalities. The pressure to succeed, to conform to the model minority myth, the notion that mental illness is a stain on your family, it's a stigma, the shame that surrounds it. So these are the issues that groups are tackling on this. And so I think it's better to, in the later questions, to get more into detail about what is actually going on out there, but I just wanted to kind of give a big overview on this issue and to just tell people that there is really good news and that it really is an exciting time to be looking at this issue, because we are finally, I think, over the hump. We've broken into a new era when it comes to mental health and Asian Americans and in the South Asian community as well. And so this is exactly the kind of thing that people are doing more and more of, what you're part of right now. So really happy to be here.
That is really good to hear. I think next also we wanted to just go a little more in depth into what some of these issues are that might affect the community. Maybe Ramey, you can take that as well and just go into it a little.
Okay. So obviously we touched on some of these topics, right? So so I think for a lot of people, when we think of mental illness, depression is probably one of the most common things. One of the things we touched on, the model minority myth, and here we're talking about young people in particular. Right? Why do we see these huge numbers and why are they so high? Well, part of it obviously is what we're here to talk about: taboo, stigma, lack of education, lack of awareness. But a lot of it is also the kind of unique pressures that we face. So as South Asian American young people, right, you have this stereotype, this image, this what we call the model minority myth. If you're not familiar with the term, Google it. A lot of great stuff out there about it. But there's this impression that if you're Asian, that must mean that you're excel at everything you do academically, your family is successful and well off financially, that you guys are, the models and the leading sort of examples of what citizens and, Americans and should be. And the reality is that's not a reflection of any reality anyone lives. The reality is that all of us are complicated people, and there's nuance and difference, and we all face struggles and challenges. Poverty is a real issue when it comes to Asian American community. But when you face these types of stereotypes as a South Asian, and I think a lot of people on this call probably have sympathized with this or have experienced this, right? Where you're accused of not being a real Asian because you're not getting all straight A's in school. You're not playing 3 instruments and, on every, honor society board and everything like that. Or within your own communities, if you're not involved in, Indian cultural activities, if you're not doing dance, if you're not doing all these things, you're not Indian enough. And these kinds of things, as you can imagine, these pressures can often exacerbate what are underlying issues that are present in all communities. So I think that's a big part of it. Suicide, I know people have touched on a bit as well. But I think the biggest challenge, when it comes to our communities is at the end of the day, coming out of the shadows. Right? I often compare this to the LGBTQ experience when it comes to coming out of the closet. It's not the same thing at all, and I don't want to oversimplify the analogy, but in many ways, what we see, when you see how society, communities responded once people started to actually come out and talk openly about being gay and things like that, and once those conversations started to happen, and once people realized, what, this isn't just a problem that happens, that we whisper about, that so-and-so, the people at the, the people who we saw last, week at the Jain event, there's a rumor that their son is, been hospitalized for something like that. But this is something that we all have in all of our families. But the only way we can get to that is if people start talking about it. And so that's why these stigmas and these taboos can be so dangerous and destructive and problematic, I think, when it comes to these kinds of things. Substance abuse. We think of a lot of traditional kinds of substance abuse, but we often don't think about the fact that, because of these pressures, the abuse of prescription drugs, particularly things like Adderall, things like that, to study, very high rates in the Asian American community. And that's led to huge tragedies. I don't know if anybody's followed the stories, but there's been a lot of news stories about college students, not only who have killed themselves, but who have actually triggered underlying conditions or just, because of overuse and abuse, actually harmed other people. And there have been some pretty harrowing stories about Asian American populations in that respect. Of course, the big thing that I think often doesn't get talked about enough with respect to the larger community is bullying, discrimination, and hate crimes. And they all have a intersection, right? Now, not all bullying involves discrimination and hate crimes, but we know that there is unique bullying that South Asians face, and especially in today's environment and climate with everything that's going on in politics and society and the news, we know that these numbers have gone up. So we want to be aware of the fact that these things have mental health consequences, and we can't ignore that part of that as well. All right, so those are some various kind of unspoken topics we want to talk about. So I don't want to take too much time, so let's go ahead and move on.
Yeah, so a lot of these things, like really good point, things we don't talk about enough. So next we're going to go into some things we do talk about, but not in the right way sometimes. So here are some just examples of what people actually say in our community compared to maybe what we should be saying. So take it away, Pooja and Amit.
So the first thing that a lot of our community that we do here, so one of the first questions in our community here is like, what will everyone say? They'll think you're crazy, and you're not crazy, beta. That's what a lot of our parents actually tend to say. The thing is, it doesn't matter what anyone thinks. Your mental health should matter only to you and no one else, because this is your thing and not the entire community and society's thing. Pooja? Pooja,
Sorry, Pooja, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. Sorry, I was on mute. Another myth that we tend to see is that the statement that this doesn't happen in the Jain community, which is wrong. Mental illness is not discriminatory based on like religion or by culture, and it can happen to anyone, and it does happen in the Jain community as it does in all communities.
Another myth that we hear is that, beta, you can do yoga, meditation, that will help you. Yes, in one sense, it does help you, it relaxes you, it takes away your stress, but in a certain extent, you sometimes do need medical help, you need therapy, you need maybe like antidepressants or certain drugs, because those things are just short term, but in the long run, you have to make a plan for yourself. So parents and community members don't seem to understand that those don't always seem to work for us.
In that same vein, something that like you might often hear is, why can't you just talk to us, like your parents, or talk to your siblings? You don't have to go to others. You don't have to make this like a public problem. And the thing is, like, no, you don't necessarily have to put everything out there, but there are things that you might not just feel comfortable sharing with your family. I know in my personal journey, like there were things that I didn't necessarily want to tell my parents at the time for fear of worrying them or anything like that. And having someone professionally trained to understand, like someone whose job it is to understand what I'm going through, is a great asset.
I just add real quick. Never underestimate the value of a neutral observer, right? Somebody who's not involved in the things you're talking about and who you don't have to worry about their feelings or emotions. You can just use them because that's your job. You're paying them, right? They're there to listen to you, not the other way around.
So another thing that I think a lot of us hear, and for other people from other religions, you might have different religious leaders, but in our community, our parents or family members or people in our community say, why don't you talk to Swamiji, Sadhu or Sadhvi? They can help you better. Same as before, like I said, yes, to a certain extent, they can help us, but sometimes you need, again, medical help. Maybe you can, maybe sometimes just like in the sense that not always spiritual leaders can help us in certain ways, such as because health problems such as heart attacks, diabetes, surgeries, cavities, going to a doctor, you need to go to those people for those situations. Just with mental health, you need to see a therapist or a psychologist or someone who like professionally in this field who knows more information. The sadhis and sadhus, our religious leaders, are great places to go to maybe start your steps into getting to talk to somebody professionally, maybe to like express something that's been on your chest, but they don't have all the answers sometimes, and sometimes they give us some directions that are good, but not always sometimes the best direction, in the sense that they don't know what we're actually going through because they have a different mindset and a different like system of speaking is one way to say it.
Another statement that is thrown out there a lot is that you need to deal with it, and then of course the age-old quote, "What happens will make you stronger." No. The same way that, like, for example, if you break your leg, if you just suck it up and keep walking on that leg and it's not killing you, so it'll make you stronger. No, your leg is gonna stay broken and it's not gonna help. You need therapy and you need crutches and you need things to help make it better. The same way with this, it will get better and it will make you stronger if you acknowledge it. So you need to be able to, like, accept that, like, this is something I need help with, and I do need to go to, like, instead of physical therapy, mental therapy. I might need medication. I might need the tools. You need to be able to find the tools to help you get through this so that you can come out stronger on the other side.
And the last thing we sometimes hear is, you hear someone saying that, oh, like XYZ has it worse than you. Well, unfortunately, yes, maybe XYZ does have it worse than me, but they don't know what I'm going through. Personal struggles are different, and each one of us have our own version of the struggle. And you, in the end, you don't want to feel, you're getting forced into feeling guilty about just because XYZ person had this XYZ problem. Well, your problem cannot compare to their problem. Just like me and Pooja and Ramey, we all have our own versions of a broad topic, but each one of us have our own personal version of our story. So in the end, you need to take care of yourself versus what that other person is dealing with. They will and they do understand that you are going through something, and they themselves are going through something else.
Yeah, you can acknowledge other people's struggles without invalidating your own. So moving on to the next slide, the world versus you. We kind of want to talk about how you can deal with, like, your mental illness in your social setting. So specifically when it comes to your family, parents, like the people that you live with, one thing to remember is that they might be, and they probably are, as scared as you. If you have never had an experience with mental illness before, it can be a little bit scary. And I know, even with all of my experience, I have come into situations and I have, like, helped people, and I myself have thought, like, oh my God, I don't know what to do here. They also, like, the culture that we live in, especially, like, with a lot of us being first generation, I'm assuming I'm first generation. My parents grew up in a society where this isn't something that you talk about. So those people who didn't have the luxury of hiding their mental illness, and that, in the sense that, like, their mental illnesses were like schizophrenia or something where their symptoms are very obvious, they're highly stigmatized against the community. And so my parents wouldn't want me to be the same way. Even right now, like, it took them a while for them to be okay with me putting my story out here, because what will society say? Even with them being so accepting of my disorders, they were scared of, like, how the rest of the community is going to see me, which is why one reason that, like, they didn't want me to, like, advertise it or necessarily talk to other people and seek that community support that you really need to be able to recover from things like this. Sometimes you come from a family setting where there isn't an understanding that there needs professional and medical help. Like Amit mentioned earlier, that, like, why can't you talk to the people in the temple, or why can't you do yoga, or why can't you do these home remedies which have been shown to help but not necessarily treat the disorder. And the things that, like, could be the stressors might be things that are expected of you. Like Ramey mentioned, the model minority myth, that you are kind of put in a situation where you're expected to do great things. So if you don't, there's a lot of community and parental pressure on you to be able to reach that. And there's a very big disconnect between it's very hard to translate the fact that, like, no, I can't meet these expectations, to that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm worthless or incapable, simply because of the background that most of our parents have come from. When it comes to your peers, and when it comes to society, everyone talks. Indian people are incredibly dramatic. And we just love having something to talk about. And when something like this happens, that, oh, so-and-so has a mental disorder, because it's such a thing that, like, nobody really talks about, if somebody comes out there and says that, oh, I have this disorder, suddenly it becomes a very hot topic, and you become the buzz of the town, whether you like it or not. Friends, sometimes they don't realize or they don't understand like what it means to have a disorder, where like, okay, you have a mental illness, does that mean you're gonna go crazy and like start screaming? Does that mean that you're dangerous? Does that mean that you need to be locked up? Like, it's just simple ignorance, and not necessarily in a bad way, just in a way that like they've never experienced it before. They want to see the majority, like they want to think, because the majority of people don't talk about these issues and therefore don't have these issues, they think that that's the norm. And so people who do come out and talk about these things are the minority, and people don't want to affiliate with the minority. And just they want you to be normal. Why can't you be normal? You know? And as flawed a term as normal is, it's the standard to which we aspire, and it's honestly a little messed up. Your family, your peers, and your community can be your biggest asset, but they can also be your Achilles heel. All you need to remember in terms of navigating your relationship with all three when it comes to your mental illness is that this is the time to be selfish. This is the time to do what is best for you and what you need to get the care that you need. And if that means integrating these three groups into your recovery, do it. If it means keeping them away for a little bit while you process what's going on, do it. Do what you need to do. And whatever that means, it's okay.
So this does not define who you are. Your mental illness doesn't make that you. So in the sense, like, for an example, I forgot to mention this earlier, but I actually suffer with borderline personality disorder. What I do is I don't actually tend to tell anybody about it because, one, even my therapist and me, we don't try to define ourselves according to that that mental illness that I'm suffering. I don't represent myself as in like, this is my crutch, please feel sorry for me, I need your sympathy. No, I'm maybe, if I tell you this, it's because I'm telling you so you are educated to know what's going on with me, so you don't judge me. So, and then if you do judge me, then that's not my problem anymore. At this point, I'm happy with who I am, and what I'm doing is meant for me and what I want to do. So in the long run, regardless of what you're going through, always remember that don't let these things cause it be your crutch. Make it actually your push. It pushes you forward to like actually excel in life. Like for me, even though I'm fighting with depression and therapy has actually helped me to succeed. And now I'm back in school right now to complete a degree that I've always wanted to pursue something in. Dance was one of my biggest strengths in life. I danced my emotions out on stage, and I always I put all my anger and my happiness and my energy into dance. YJ especially, if you see me at convention and working, you see me running around like some crazy person. But the thing is, it was because I'm using all that negative energy to turn it into positive energy. And so there will be days where you're high and low, but you just got to push it through, and you can do this. And we're all there to support you.
Yeah, so kind of getting a little bit into the aspect of Jainism and this issue as a religion, and not just as the Jain community. Obviously, there's nothing sort of directly in Jainism, as far as I know, that says, like, this is why you have depression, or you should do XYZ when you go through this kind of issue. But I think there are some tenets and some principles in Jainism that, if we kind of think about them in this context that we don't normally think about them, they can be really relevant. So I guess one sort of basic thing is the idea that hurting yourself is a form of BOP. So some of the things we mentioned earlier, like self-harm or substance abuse or suicide, yes, in Jainism, those are considered BOP, just as hurting another person is bad, hurting yourself is bad. But I think, to me, this doesn't mean that you should get stressed out if you're not taking care of yourself, or feel bad if you're going through something like that and think, oh my God, now I'm doing BOP and that's even worse. To me, what that really means is that just like it's about compassion for others, Jainism is really about having compassion for yourself, and that your soul and your well-being are equally important, and they matter just as much as that of the people around you. And of course, in Jainism, a really sort of central tenet is forgiveness and forgiving others, which, you know, we always kind of do after our Samvatsari Pratikraman, and we go around saying, you know, I forgive you, I hope you forgive me. But forgiving others really actually starts with forgiving ourselves and not blaming ourselves for things that we can't control or things that we can't help. It's really about saying, okay, whatever I am is okay. I'm not going to blame myself for that. And another principle that I think is really important in Jainism is this very ancient principle that all life is interdependent, and that all living beings kind of mutually depend on each other in a network. And I kind of take that to mean is that even if you are feeling like you're going through something alone, you are never actually alone, and that there are people who love and appreciate you no matter what. And also that it's kind of okay to take the support of others. I definitely hear you guys in what you've been saying so far is that sometimes we're not told that it's okay to go to like an outside source, like a therapist, or to ask for help or support if we're going through something. But this principle that, yes, as a life form, you need the help of others around you to really survive and progress. I think that means that, yes, you should feel free to take the support as needed. Because of this principle. And sort of one other thing that I think is something we can think about is this idea of karma and the fact that we can kind of control our karma. And so there was this moment I had this semester at one point where I was like really freaked out about a problem set because I hadn't started until the last minute, and I was really angry with myself for like being so behind, and I was panicked because it was so late that I was almost like, what am I going to do? Like, it's not even worth it to start now because I'm so behind and I'm so mad at myself. And coincidentally, I was like looking at karma theory for other YJ stuff. And I realized to myself, I was like, if I tell myself that my actions bring me karma, that means that my future is in my control and that it's never too late to try something new. So even though I'm in this situation now, I can always try at least looking at the problem set prompt, or at least emailing the TA for an extension, or just try something, and that my future is in my control and I'm not powerless. And I think in Jainism, there is this idea that you're never powerless or helpless. You, no matter how much you feel so, you do have ability and some self-power. And one last thing I kind of wanted to mention was just like the theme of personal wellness in Jainism, like you guys have touched on. Maybe some people will say you should do meditation and yoga to feel better, and maybe that will or won't work. But if that works for you, and if traditional Jain ways of doing meditation, like doing a samayik or pratikraman, if those things help you feel better, then you should entirely feel empowered to use them as part of whatever self-care you want to do. And it can be something like simple, like saying Navkar mantra and kind of thinking to yourself, like, okay, here I'm taking 5 minutes to just be peaceful. Or it can be like, yeah, I'm going to do a nightly pratikraman or something, but use that time to like reflect and sort of think back and rest my mind for a bit. Like you can take advantage of traditional things in Jainism to sort of help your mental state. They don't have to be just like limited to the like temple context or whatever. And so those are just some things we kind of wanted to go into with Jainism itself. But of course, as everyone's been talking about, you know, for many of you, you may want to actually seek care from a professional. So next, we're going to go into a little bit about how you could go about doing that, what are sort of Pooja and Amit's stories of doing that, and just some general tips and strategies. So Pooja and Amit, you want to give your stories first, maybe?
Sure. Amit, would you like to go first?
Sure, thank you. So the way I got into this, like I said earlier in my story, if some of you guys maybe missed out, I actually, two of my friends, when all this occurred right now, was that we all got on a three-way phone call with me because they don't live in the same state as me. One's a doctor and one is actually a therapist. So they both are like, we'll talk, we'll get you some information for you on what to do and how you can get the help you need. So what they did was, we'll be sending out these resources shortly later in this presentation today. But I went through a website that was Psychology Today or something, like, I forgot exactly the website's name, but it's Psychology Today, I think. My friend told me about it, I looked for personally, I want to go see an Indian therapist. One, I cannot relate to anyone who's not Desi when it comes to a lot of the Desi related issues. Two, I tend to speak in Gujarati, Hindi, or sometimes Punjabi to represent what's going on. So when I found my therapist, the two things that I needed was they need to be Desi and they need to be able to speak like Hindi at least, because I can translate some stuff from Gujarati to Hindi at least. So my therapist is actually, her name is Joy Singh. She is an Indian female here in Naperville, Illinois, who I actually see once a week, sometimes twice a week if I need to. And she helps me out. And she's actually first-born generation Indian too, like I am. So we even get each other on a level of even understanding what personal issues that I go through that she understands that she can relate back to. She's a couple of years older than me, but not too old where it's like, you're older than me and I don't understand you, but she completely gets what I need to go through. At one point, I had to switch therapists due to some personal situations with that she had to go away for. So I met another therapist. Her name was Dr. Shifali Sandhya. She was amazing too. I even spoke to her in Gujarati and Hindi. Honestly, for me, I personally needed to do that because on a cultural level, they understood me. On a American level, they understood me, and like they got all these situations that I didn't even realize that I was facing through. So both were amazing people in my life, and I thank them so much. Pooja, do you want to tell yours?
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. My story in terms of seeking care, so once my parents decided that I needed to get help, I went to my primary care doctor and he gave me a recommendation, or he gave me a referral to a psychiatrist and a therapist in the area. And it was just completely random. The therapist that I saw initially he was a great therapist. I just didn't engage with him because I was still in this mindset where I did not really think that I needed help. And the way therapy works, if anyone has ever tried it, it only works as well as you let it. So if you're not going to engage with your therapist, if you're not going to like put in anything, you're really not going to get much out of it. And that's exactly how it was with my first therapist. After he retired, I was in the process of trying to find another one, and I went through a couple of people, and none of them really worked for me. There were a lot of people who I just didn't really connect with, and that was something that I had to be okay with because like this isn't like you can't settle for a therapist. You can't be like, oh, like this person could work for me, like they have the qualifications, because if you don't feel comfortable, if you don't feel like you're going to be able to open up to them, they're not going to be able to help you at all. And so I went through a couple before I found my current therapist. Her name is Anna, and she's here in the Durham area, and I absolutely love her. She's honestly one of the best people, and I'm moving soon for a job, and I'm gonna have to leave her, and it's making me very sad. But yeah, I think like just finding someone who really works for you, and I chose to go the route of not having an Indian be my therapist because that's just what I was more comfortable with. And like whatever, again, it all comes back to whatever works for you. There's no right answers. There's just being very true to like your needs and making sure that those are being fulfilled.
So those are, thanks for your like specific stories. Ramey, can you go into maybe just like a very general overview of if someone wants to do this, like just where do they start?
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to be quick. I know we want to get to questions. So there's a few things you want to get started with, right? So for all of us, for me, it was daunting, right? When I finally figured this out, I didn't know where to start. A lot of people start with your primary care physician, and hopefully you have a primary care physician that you have a good relationship with and that has some good training on this. Nowadays, primary care physicians are supposed to be trained on mental health stuff, so they're supposed to at least kind of provide you that sort of frontline kind of initial help. But it's not always true. It can be challenging with some of the older physicians. But that's a good place a lot of people start. There's a lot of great resources we're going to share with you that have a lot of great guides designed especially for young people and especially for South Asian American young people or Asian American young people. I would take a look at those as well. You know, the first thing that's most important is to get a diagnosis. Any counselor, therapist, or doctor is going to say, unless you know exactly what you're dealing with, it's going to be very difficult to know about treatment, right? The next thing you want to do is to know whether you need to have any kind of chemical type of regimen for pharmaceutical therapy, right? Which a lot of people do need, myself included. Or if it's going to be counseling only, or if it's going to be some combination. Most research shows that the combination is often the most effective, unless you're dealing with certain personality disorders that may not have a known medical or biochemical cause yet. You want to look for cultural competency, right? What does that mean? That means people who are going to be appropriate for you, just like Amit and Pooja have talked about. For Amit and for me, it was important to have somebody with an API background because I wanted someone to understand what growing up in an Asian family was like, and also what dealing with growing up as Asian American specifically was like. And I actually have a South Asian therapist as well. My therapist is named Dr. Lena Batra, and she actually used to be a therapist for Asian American students at University of Texas at Austin. And so, you know, for me, it took a while. I had to try a few out. I kind of, you know, I had a therapist that wasn't good, and that actually set me back because I kind of stopped doing therapy, and it kind of caused me to turn away from treatment and follow-up for a while. It wasn't until I found one that was appropriate for me. But what you need to know is that you might need to try several therapists and never be afraid to do what you want. It's about treating you, not about what the therapist wants or anything like that. Now, for some folks, you might have some insurance concerns, and this could vary for a great deal of people. There is a warning about the fact that sometimes, depending on where you live, resources can be challenging. But there's a lot of telemedicine now, and there's a lot of ways to do conferences, video conferencing, all that kind of stuff to deal with therapy and things like that. So if you can't find a therapist that's appropriate, or you can't find one you can afford, those are options that are available. Fortunately, a lot of private insurance has very limited mental health coverage. It's supposed to be changing, but it's not there yet. And a lot of, unfortunately, therapists and psychiatrists don't take insurance because of the challenges they have with mental health bureaucracy when it comes to insurance companies. So those are things you are going to look for and encounter. But again, resources are really great, and there's resources we can share with you. The important thing to remember is you're not alone in this. People have gone through this before. We've gone through this. Other people have gone through this. Other people will go through this. That means that a lot of people are there available to be your guides, and a lot of us are willing to do so. But the challenge is, number one, recognizing that you may need help, what exactly it is you need help for, and then trying to seek out those resources. So I'll just go ahead and stop there so we can move to questions.
Just one quick question before we go to Q&A. Any of you guys, what would you say if someone said they were nervous or afraid about going to a therapist, whether about even starting the process or just like literally about stepping foot into an office?
Well, I mean, know that, and this is a lawyer in me, right? Therapists are bound by HIPAA, right? Health information privacy. So, you know, anything you discuss with your therapist is strongly protected by confidentiality. There are some limited things that are required to report if there's imminent, you know, if there's a likelihood of imminent violence or something like that. But other than that, therapists, I find, for the most part, are incredibly serious about their ethical duty to keep things private and confidential. And your therapist will tell you, you control your information and who you want to talk to. If you deal with the therapist and you don't get the impression that they place a high value on that privacy and confidentiality, then I'd say that's a good sign to talk to a different therapist. But you should, you know, most of the time, you should feel confident that therapists are bound by these duties, right? And again, I think you can help with the intimidation factor of it if you just remember you're looking for someone to serve your needs, right? That's why you go with a therapist, right? When you talk to your parents, you talk to your friends, you have to sometimes worry about, well, I don't want to tell them too much because I don't want to worry them or make them panic. Therapists, their job is simply to sit there and help you, right? You don't have to worry about them, period. And given that, you should feel fully empowered to take control of that process. And I know it's challenging, and if you have somebody who can go with you the first time you might trust, that might be a helpful thing, right? Just like going to see a doctor about something else that might be very difficult or challenging.
I mean, for one way, I know Pooja hit on the subject too, which is great because I didn't have this issue. But if you don't like your therapist, because if you just like, what if you even though you're nervous, but you know that you don't fit with that therapist, they will. My therapist even suggested me right on my first day, saying if you don't feel like we're a perfect fit for each other, I can definitely recommend you to other people as well as whatever you're looking for. So always make sure to see that if that therapist doesn't fit for you, if you don't feel comfortable with them at all, You're always allowed to change a therapist, regardless. That's their profession. They understand that they're not gonna take it personal. Because especially when I had to switch between my first one and my second one, I went back to my first one. She was completely normal about it.
And then one more thing that I wanted to add is that depending on where you are, actually getting an appointment might be a little bit difficult. So kind of get on it early. If you feel like this is something that you might want to do, don't wait. It's much easier to make an appointment and then cancel than it is to get an appointment at the last minute.
Okay, good stuff to know. So now we're going to jump into the questions that you guys submitted. Of course, this Google form, I think the link is on the event page, is still open. So if you have any questions about anything everyone's talking about, feel free to submit. But with that, we're going to get into some of the questions that were submitted earlier. If we can see the slide, yeah. So the first question was submitted was, why is there such a stigma surrounding mental health issues in Jain culture or in the Jain community? Amit, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. So the first thing to say that it's not Jain culture itself. It's technically the society and the community within the Jain community. A lot of people and aunties and uncles, and I'm sorry for any aunties and uncles who are watching this, but I've heard this said, oh, it doesn't happen in our community. Bijana community ma chaliche, or so-and-so's community will happen in. So it's honestly, it does happen in the Jain community. It happens in every community. It can happen in Sikh, Hindu, Muslim, Christian, non-religious, American, Indian, Pakistani, everybody. It affects in all our communities. So the stigma is not around Jain culture. It's around just our diaspora South Asians in general. Anjali, you're on mute.
Sorry, Amit, do you want to go a little more into sort of some reasons or possible reasons for that the stigma would exist in any of these communities?
Sure. So some of the stigma that we actually see in our communities and I've actually watched a lot of documentaries on BBC and a lot of even some Indian channels too. A lot of this stuff comes back to being back in like the old Indian culture and the way that things were taken back in the day. One was that people, even in American culture technically too, people weren't sure what mental health was. So they just when they think mental health, they think you're actually like mentally unstable and you're crazy. And I'm sorry for anyone who takes offense to that. I'm not trying to be rude in that sense. But in more or less, it's just that ideology has stayed within the South Asian community a lot. I've even noticed that other cultures and religions who are Desi still they have this whole idea that, instead of going to mental health, they should just start doing all these vidis and rituals and getting away of the evil eye, or someone's like, one of the ones I've heard is like nazar lagyu koine, and it's like that means like someone's put like the evil eye on you. So a lot of these things are just like culturally, as in like South Asian culture related, or even in general, like our parents back in India, back in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, all those South Asian countries, they weren't as advanced as we are now. Even now in India, they are advanced in this segment of life, but still, there's still that issue of taboo and this is the norm. And a lot of people don't realize that the norm, they don't say it out loud because it's like you don't want to flash your like information to the world because you're just afraid of what other people are going to say. And that's usually tends to be the reason why the stigma surrounds our culture, because we just think that, oh, we don't hear about this happening in our deras or so-and-so's community. But when we do, the whole community ends up opening their eyes for maybe at least a couple days, a week, a month, maybe just for a couple hours, and goes, oh my God, this happened in our community. And now we should tell our children and take care of them. But it should actually be every day. You should be keeping your eyes open.
Yeah, and since this question kind of asked about Jainism, I also wanted to bring in a little of my knowledge of Jainism into it. To my knowledge, I could be wrong, but to my knowledge, there is nothing in Jainism that says these issues aren't real or that this pain is not valid. That stigma does not come from Jainism, the religion, as far as I know. And I think historically there's been a bit of a sort of argument or reasoning that, oh, it's your past karma that is the reason for any kind of suffering you might go through today. Except what we forget when we say that is that person's past karma. But what Jainism tells us is that we as a community should practice compassion and tolerance. And if we do not practice compassion for the people around us, that's our own bad karma that we're getting. So I guess to everyone in the community that might be watching, or anyone with friends or family members who might go through this, it's really important to remember that Jainism tells us to practice compassion. It tells us to practice anekantvad, which is the idea that your view isn't the only one and someone else's feelings are valid, and their perspective is valid just as yours is. And just because you don't understand what they're going through doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And one last point is that gossip and criticism are papastanaks. This isn't the kind of thing you should be going around saying, oh, so-and-so has this. That's actually not Jain. So kind of to go into the next question, we also received a question on how can I communicate with someone if I have anxiety, depression, etc. How can I be open about it when sometimes people are very quick to judge or very slow to understand? Maybe Pooja, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I would love to. So one thing to remember in terms of like how you want to communicate this, Ramey mentioned this earlier about how it's akin to the coming out process for people of the LGBT community in the sense that it's a very personal thing that you're choosing to share with the world. And the key word here is choosing. What you do and do not tell is completely up to you. For me, and I'm going to use the term coming out because I do consider it a coming out. And I'm sorry if anyone finds that offensive. But for me, my coming out was a little bit forced. I was, throughout middle and high school, was very much part of the fake it till you make it crowd, in that I was putting on this persona, I was putting on this image of myself that was so opposite of what I was feeling and so opposite of what was going on like in my mind, and so like out of touch with what I was feeling, that like the whole point was that if people are looking here, they won't be able to see what's happening over here. They won't be able to see these disorders, and they won't be able to see like what's really going on with me. And in college, I had a panic attack in front of one of my best friends. And for the sake of this, let's just call her Katie. And she asked what was happening, and I explained my disorders. And Katie considered that enough to label me as a danger to myself and others. And she basically went to the Duke admin and got a restraining order put on me. And when I talked to the case manager said that Katie had described my disorders to her, and that had took the gaps that I had put in my story, like trying to keep this surface level on, and filled it in with details that honestly to the case manager would make me a danger to myself and others, and probably did give her reason to think that maybe I shouldn't be on campus. And that was when I decided that, okay, if people are going to hear bits and pieces of my stories, either through like whatever I choose to put out there or gossip or whatever, and then fill in the gaps with just such incorrect details that it's going to lead people to have this very negative view of me, then I want to take control of that. So I decided to put my story out there and basically got on social media and put everything on there from start to finish, in a way that people could read it and process it and talk to me about it and talk to other people about it. And it kind of gave an opportunity because the story was out there, but it wasn't really being forced onto people, and people could engage with it as they saw fit. And then I made it very clear that like, this is my story. If you have questions or concerns or whatever, come talk to me. But you don't get to say what my story is. It's my story. And this method kind of fit for me because I am I like to be in control of things. In terms of how to communicate with other people, there is the fact that like now that my story is out there on social media, anyone can see it, including future employers, including like other professional relationship, personal relationships, anything like that. And that is something that I had to consider when I was putting everything out there. And for me, it was worth it. It was worth being able to have that control in my life and sacrificing whatever I might have in order to do so. The best thing that I could say about how you would want to go about that is, again, go back to the just central mantra when it comes to taking care of yourself, is do what's best for you.
Thank you so much, Pooja. So the next question we got was about how to stop negative thoughts when you get in a bad headspace. How can you tell if you are depressed, if you're going through anxiety, or if you're just going through stress? And I think this question will probably be very relatable to a lot of people watching, because let's face it, we're Indian. We've all gone through moments of extreme stress. So maybe, Pooja, do you want to kind of take this one too?
Yeah. So the main difference between having a disorder and just being stressed is that disorders don't go away. Because so when you're stressed, you can generally point to something. Oh, I have an exam coming up, or I have this big deadline coming up, or there's a lot of people in my house and I don't really know what to do right now. Like there's a lot of very tangible things that you can generally point to. When you have depression or anxiety, it's very often out of nowhere. You can't really say, why am I feeling like this? What's triggering this? And it doesn't go away easily. Having anxiety means that you have this feeling of constant stress and pressure, rather like no matter what environment you're in, and you don't know how to make it go away. And it's constantly on you. I think, so yeah, that's the difference. And if you feel like this isn't like a normal thing, like you don't know why this is happening and you don't know how to stop it, then yeah, maybe there is a professional, there is a like a diagnosable disorder happening, and you should go talk to a professional and follow up and see what's going on. In terms of stopping negative thoughts, and this is something that can apply to you whether you have a diagnosed disorder or not, there are a lot of things that you can do. And again, can't say this enough, do what works for you. So for me personally, I went through a lot of things. I went through yoga, painting, running, like just animal therapy, music therapy, all sorts of things. And for me, that I found the best thing that worked for me was meditating. I have a couple of like bracelets that I keep on my wrist, and then if I'm ever stressed, I just go through and do Nokar mantra, like one for each beat, and by the end I'm good. And I also keep a gratitude journal, which basically every morning or every night before I go to sleep, I write down 2 or 3 things that happened that day that I have to be grateful for. And if I'm ever feeling that like, wow, I'm worthless, or like there's nothing good happening in my life, or just feeling like my depression is just getting me really down, going back and flipping through that and seeing everything that I have to be grateful for and everything that's working for me it's a great like visual reinforcement that no, things aren't as bad as they seem, and it can kind of get me out of that negative space.
That is such useful advice. And we also got a question from someone asking, what are some things I can do if I think I might be going through early symptoms of a mental health concern? So maybe any of you guys can sort of speak to that, as to like, if you think something is just kind of starting out, like what are some things you can do at that point?
So one thing, if you are going through those early symptoms and you're noticing stuff, tend to like, there are questions even online you can check to see if you are feeling some stuff, but I would recommend, like, if you seriously do feel like you wanted to see someone or speak to someone, you can always look up professional help places and make an appointment, as Pooja has said before, and go and see someone. If you're in university or even high school, definitely you can always go to your school's counselors, psychologists. They can help you out, and some schools will even tell you, they give you some free ones, the first 4 are free or something like that, or they can even point you out to other places where you can go and get that professional help as well. So always, and even if you like want to speak to someone who you even know personally, like if my friends ask me once or twice, like, hey, Amit, I'm feeling some of these feelings. What did you do when you went through this? It's a great thing to talk to a friend that you know who's maybe seeing a therapist or has gone through some of these situations, because they can give you some of the best advice and saying like, hey, so this is what I did. I recommend you can try these things too, but definitely make sure it's something that you want to do and you actually are in control of it, because you don't want over you. You want to take over it.
There are
Yeah,
a few-
oh,
I was just going to mention
sorry.
real quick, there's a few like national like free crisis hotlines you can call, and they call it crisis hotline, but sometimes it's you can actually just call them and say, hey, I'm dealing with kind of a situation right now. I don't know if it's something I need to be worried about. And those folks are typically trained to kind of do a real basic initial assessment and then to help connect you with other resources or give you some advice. But for something like that, where you're not quite sure if you feel like it hasn't really affected you in any serious way yet, but you're kind of suspecting something might be going on, those also might be helpful as well. And then, as Emmett said, there are batteries. There's a real simple like 40 question or something like that, a common one that even doctors will give you for depression. You can go online and take those and pretty easily, and they'll give you some stuff. But the hotlines are out there as well, and you can call even if you're not in danger, right? You can still say, hey, this is what's going on. What do I do? Or you can even say, hey, a friend of mine's going through this. What should I do to help them because I'm concerned about them?
I will amend this to say that like one thing you should not do is go it alone. So yes, there are batteries and there are tests and stuff online, but don't take one of those tests and have it come out like, oh, I have depression, and just leave it like that. If you're gonna do something like that, that's completely fair and that's completely fine to kind of just do a self-assessment, but do talk to someone, and someone who's relatively qualified. So like not like my little brother is probably not the best person to talk to, but like if you talk to a doctor or someone who's gone through this, like say like, hey, I think this might be a problem, and like there are plenty of resources like Ramey and Amit mentioned that to kind of confirm or deny, and either way it's completely fine.
And I just wanted to also speak to what Amit's point about being in control, because I thought that was really valuable. I had this moment this semester when I was like extremely stressed, and I was texting a friend about it, and I was like falling apart, and she texted back like, oh, you should try doing XYZ. That would be helpful. And then she immediately followed it up with a text that said, whatever you do is your choice, and you should pick what's best for you. Don't think I'm trying to tell you what to do. It's your choice. And I thought that was like the nicest thing I'd heard all semester, because at the end of the day, you have to do what works for you at the time that it can work for you. But yeah, so I think the next question is going to be extremely relatable to a lot of youth watching. We did get multiple questions about how to discuss these kinds of issues with parents, especially with South Asian or Indian parents, in such a way that they take you seriously. And one of the people writing the question said, my parents just blow me off and say it's not a real concern, or that I'm just down for a little bit and I will get better, and it's not actually a real thing. So Pooja and Amit, do you guys want to kind of share your thoughts on that? Because I'm sure you have gone through a lot of things.
Yeah, Amit, why don't you start and I can follow up?
All right, so thank you, Pooja, and thank you, Anjali. So one, I'm really sorry to hear about this, that your parents are doing this to you guys. I'm really, really sorry, because I've experienced a little bit of it, and I didn't experience a little bit of it, because like I mentioned before, Indian male ego. All you boys who are watching this, it's a big issue between us men, and we need to like realize that ourselves, that we have this issue, because they tried to get me to see some therapists before. I kind of blew it off maybe, or I just didn't feel comfortable.
Amit, I think we lost you.
Okay, so I'll hop in. So yeah, I think I can't speak to Amit's experience, so I'm just gonna kind of hop to my experience, and if we get Amit back, he can continue on with what he was saying. So in terms of talking to a parent, first of all, you don't need a disorder to seek help. Therapists are paid professionals who sit there and who help you through your problems, and that problem doesn't have to be a professional diagnosis. I think discussing this, like, I think having like depressive feelings or anxious feelings without having anxiety or depression are very valuable things, and it's completely fair to go to your parents and say like, hey, I'm feeling nervous about blah blah blah, and not really have a proper reason for doing so. In terms of taking them seriously, I really wish that I had an answer to this, because I know like while my parents were incredibly supportive, my community didn't take it seriously until a girl committed suicide, and by that point it is entirely too late. It's something that people will take it seriously if there are enough people who want to take it seriously. So if there are enough people in your community who are willing to stand up and say like, this is not an abstract problem that just happens, this is a problem that happens to me. And if there are enough people who are able to say that, if you have a big enough group that like, this is a very real concern in our community, it affects 10 people, 15 people, 30 people, 100 people, then it becomes something that, oh, this is a real problem, and maybe we shouldn't take it seriously. Maybe this isn't just my child being lazy or being like too high strung or being something. Maybe this is something that we should really think about. But of course, that starts with one person. And I mean, I know in my community, me and the girl who recently passed away, we are those one people. So getting other people to stand up and ready to contribute to the conversation and things like this is one of the ways to do it.
So I'm sorry guys for about that earlier. I got cut off and I didn't realize my Wi-Fi kicked me out. So I'm back. So let me start my story all over again. And Pooja, thank you for taking over while I was gone. So like I said, sorry about what happened to you. So most Desi parents are somewhat in denial about mental health and won't realize the situation until it's like way too late in the game. And I've mentioned this before about that, like it's something to do with culture more or less in society. Mine honestly took me seriously at one point, and well, I think I did mention about the Indian man's ego. I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, guys. But they did take me seriously and they didn't take me seriously, and I didn't take them seriously at one point when they tried to get me to go to therapy when I was younger, but I didn't know what was going on at that time, or I was going to therapy. But when I started, so mine like found out that I was on antidepressants. And the way they found out was that I used to work for them. And so at one of our stores, I left my medication in the office. I call my dad, I'm like, Dad, can you pick up my medication for me? Like I left it at the store and it's this bottle. He looks at this bottle, and my dad's not dumb because he was a pharmacist in India. Actually, he was a pharmacist here and a doctor in India. So he kind of knew what I was maybe taking, but he didn't want to ask me or something. My mom he goes to ask my mom. My mom tells him that he's on antidepressants. And so they kind of started acting a little weird around me because they were like scared that I was going to go off the edge. But they started realizing how serious the situation was. And I was going to therapy every week, like once a week, because they wondered where, like my dad kept wondering where I was going half the time for like 2 hours because I drive there, come back, and be somewhere else. But they kind of started taking it seriously, and they did find at one point, and this was before I even started antidepressants, like a couple when I was younger, found a letter or a note or something I wrote. I wrote some really depressing stuff back in the day, guys. So it's normal to write some stuff when you're alone and in your notebooks at school and stuff because,
you know, can suck at that.
Yeah. So they kind of caught that, and they basically gave me this awkward conversation and said, we're not going to give it to you back to you anymore, beta, and we're going to keep it apri passe and all these weird things. I'm like, what are you talking about? But this isn't the best advice to tell you guys the truth, to whoever's asked this question, that I actually did go behind my parents' back, and I went and I got the help I needed, and then they found out. But at times, if you need to go behind your parents' back and get the help you need, then you need to do it because you're taking care of yourself. And in the long run, they'll realize that you did this because you're trying to save them as well, the pain and the mental anguish and the emotional anguish of losing a child in the process of not realizing how serious your condition was. So,
Having parents who don't or won't understand is no reason to not get help.
Is it okay? I know we're running over and things like that, but I do kind of want to jump in a little bit on this one because I definitely had the experience of my parent of having a very difficult time with my parents, and it's taken me probably half a decade to get them to at least sort of accept the reality of my diagnosis. That's sort of where we've gotten to this day. So one thing my therapist told me, and again, she said, just keep in mind, it is not your job to make your parents, enlightened about mental health, right? That's their issue to deal with for them. You can be supportive, you can be a resource, you can be there for them, but ultimately, again, it's about your recovery, it's about your wellness, and it's about taking care of yourself. And my therapist said, we have to get past this kind of thing we tell ourselves that our parents have to know about every single thing going on in our lives, right? It's okay to have information, things that we keep to ourselves, intimate parts of ourselves that we choose to reveal and to, et cetera. And you just have to accept that, what? It's going to be a struggle for a lot of people. It's going to be a time. But, sometimes when it started out, like if I look back now, and I wouldn't have even thought I would have made the progress I've made in the last 5 years, if not, at the beginning of this. But I have. And my therapist was incredibly helpful. She kind of guided me through a lot of conversations. I would tell her ahead of time, hey, I think I'm going to have another conversation with my parents this weekend on the phone. And I kind of want to broach a little bit more about what we're doing. And she would kind of advise me on, okay, here's ways you can do it. Here's some advice. Here's some thoughts on how you can do that. And then there's peripheral ways, right? So one thing I've noticed is that when people are willing to talk about it, the more we host these types of events, the more parents also attend them or hear about them. And it does start to gradually change their minds, right? You never change someone's mind in one sitting. It's about a process. They have to struggle with their ingrained notions, the things that have been their thoughts and their habits for years and years and years. And it takes time, any topics like that. But the more we do this and the more you kind of get your parents to go, it can be very helpful. I'd also throw in a couple options is that everyone's experienced this. Your parents will listen to another adult saying something that you've been saying. An adult that might be supportive, an uncle or an auntie or a relative who might have a little bit more of an open-minded view or a little bit more educated on this. And sometimes your parents will listen to them when they won't listen to you. And the same thing with sometimes even other young people, right? So I will go and give talks about mental health into the Chinese community. And parents will come up to me and they'll tell me about how they're going to do all these things and pay attention to all these things I talked about. And then their kid will come up to you after and they'll be like, I've been telling them this stuff for years, or I've been telling them, I need help for years. And like, it just takes you to say one presentation and they listen to it. But sometimes it's just about that. Your family is too close. They can't be objective. And it touches back on like, that's why a therapist is important. So really it's about understanding. It's not going to be easy. There are resources out there to help you and guide you because everyone deals with this issue to some extent. And your therapist and these resources are good and valuable and important. But at the end of the day, right, different people in my life play different roles. I have people that I found who are part of my network, who support me, who help me out when I need it. And they're there for me, right? My parents love me. I love them. And I go to them if I need help with things that they're good at and they're strong on. But it's okay, right? It's okay. Right. And my therapist, I think one of the most important things she taught me is she said, a lot of the things that we think of as good or bad or right or wrong really aren't good or bad or right or wrong. It's just the way things are. And once we learn to accept that that is the way things are and that we can only control so much of what we do and our choices, then those things kind of start to fall away. They don't start to bother you as much anymore. I accept that my mom and dad are never going to be where I want them to be exactly. I accept that about them. And that doesn't mean they're good or bad people. It just means they're people like me. And ultimately, that helped give me a lot of peace.
Thank you guys so much for all of that. And just one sort of very personal thing for me, I think what you mentioned, Ramey, about like some things happening very gradually could be relevant for people whose parents do kind of want to understand, but maybe don't necessarily understand from the get-go. Of course, this isn't everyone's experience, but maybe for the parents who might be listening or kids who think their parents do want to understand but just don't get it right away, if you have the energy to, having repeated and just gradual and continuing conversations with parents, the ones who do want to understand. Sometimes that's just the only way. Even for like, I remember when I was going through a lot of grief after my grandfather died, it wasn't like one conversation with my mom, like, oh, I'm really down right now. It was repeated phone calls and just like, continuing things. But eventually, like, then we reached a more understanding state than we were at immediately after it happened. So I think we got one next question, which is pretty specific, and it's an aspect we haven't touched on yet, but it could maybe be very relevant to some people who are watching, and that is about LGBTQ plus issues. So someone asked the question, can being lesbian be the cause of my bad mental health? Every time I meet someone, especially Indians, I feel like I'm being disapproved of, and this makes me feel so alone. So how would you guys suggest maybe broaching the topic of being gay with conservative parents, or maybe how to sort of emotionally support yourself when they are not tolerant, as many in the Indian community are not necessarily open-minded to this?
I can start too if you like, or you can go ahead. It's up to you.
Why don't you go ahead?
All right. So I want to let you know, to the person who wrote this, first and foremost, your sexual orientation is not the cause of your mental health. Let's just get that straight. All right. Be proud of who you are and what you are, because that is who you are. And I want to say this personally to you. I am proud of who you are and who you are expressing to be. Because I've even asked my therapist about this. And so the thing is, the reason you're feeling bad mental health is because of like social and cultural and social pressures, which you're fighting yourself. So like a lot, and even if you're not gay, even a lot of Indian people have the social pressure of marriage. And that's one of the biggest causes to your mental health, maybe, is that you are socially pressured by this rock on you that you're supposed to be making our parents proud, or things that our parents are expecting us to continue, but they don't realize that you can still do this based on your sexual orientation. So that's one thing you should understand, that like those pressures and cultural reasons and society, especially, like a lot of people, like, this isn't the norm. It's because we just don't, there's not that many people representing this, but there are a lot of LGBT Indian, and there's a couple few Jain ones too. I would like to mention Pooja Mehta and Vaibhav Jain. They are actually one of our Jain LGBT couples who are from our Jain community, and it's really awesome to see that we have this amazing Jain couple. Both of them are Jain and are like together and happy, and it's great to see such like movement in our community. And then to remind yourself that you're not, regardless of you being Indian, being LGBT is still a taboo in general. So you yourself are not alone. There are so many other Indians, South Asians who are LGBTQ as well. And there are organizations all across the United States, Canada, the UK, Australia, even in the world, and even in India. They're still fighting for these rights in India still. So you're not the only one who is LGBT. Just like mental health, approaching such a topic can be difficult. Just be prepared for the worst situation that can come out if you want to talk to your parents about this, and that you're not alone. Just remember this, and always be ready for whatever scenario is going to come up next. Because, like I said, I personally know another, like, they're Hindu actually, but a lesbian Hindu couple who's Gujarati living in Chicago here, and I know them personally. I know a couple gay Indian people, couple gay Pakistanis, couple Bangladeshis. There are a lot of Desi LGBT. Maybe you don't know them personally. Maybe some people aren't like absolutely able to come out of the closet yet because of what's going on in the world, current political pressures or family pressures or social pressures, or they're just not ready yet to come out, or they haven't even figured it out. They're curious. But just note that your sexuality is not the reason for your mental health. It's the issues, like all the issues that are surrounding it are causing maybe mental health and like issues for you, that you feel depressed or you're upset because people are saying such things about you. Like how you said that you feel some disapproval from Indians. Well, just let you know, right now, I can tell you for a fact, YJ is definitely not judging you. We are one of the most open-minded organizations. And be prepared to approach your parents when you're ready. You need to be mentally and physically and emotionally ready to talk to your parents about being gay. That is something that you need to be ready on your own, and have a support system as well for you. Like, make a support system, have some friends, family members, if you have some maybe open-minded family members, if you do, be financially set up and everything, because this is just something that you should be prepared for. Okay, Ramey, you can go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Amit. So none of us ourselves are LGBTQ, so that was part of, we want to try to provide an answer, but without kind of, assuming things too much. But I've lived with, I lived with gay roommates for years and years and years. And so through them, I actually became pretty heavily involved with a lot of gay, and particularly gay Asian American as well, organizations and causes and things like that. And then, of course, my own wife, she actually came out in high school to her parents as bisexual, and dated several, had relationships with several other women throughout high school and college. And she, encountered a lot of challenges with that. And let me tell you, her mom is a very politically liberal woman. And even then, she had a lot of, difficulty. And her mom was definitely, I think, her initial reaction was definitely negative. And so understand that, so with that understanding, that's sort of where I'm getting my information and perspective. I think the underlying kind of main theme of what I want to say is that the biggest source oftentimes of despair, of feeling isolated, alone, giving up, is the sense that you're alone, that you're the only person who's going through this. Nobody else has the problems that you have. There's something wrong with you, something uniquely terrible about your situation or you, and that nobody else will understand if you explain it, or they'll think you're just completely off the wall. And the reality is you're not. You're not. As I mentioned before, having a mental illness and being LGBTQ have a lot of things in common. Right? For me and for a lot of people, right, we feel we have to hide or suppress or be ashamed of who we are. Right? The word passing, right, is used both in the LGBTQ context and in the mental health context. Covering up, passing, trying to pretend like you're something you're not. Right? And it's that inability to tell people who you really care about, who are close with you, who you really are, that's incredibly difficult to live with. And so that's what isolated me the most with mental health. And I think that's what a lot of my gay friends and my wife felt, is that type of isolation. And it's funny because once you actually start to tell your story and talk to people, you realize, wow, I'm not alone. And in fact, lots of people can recount thought processes that I have gone exactly through, that I remember distinctly nights where I had dialogues in my head or struggled with something and thought all the same things that somebody else tells me about. And those things are incredibly liberating and invigorating. So yeah, know that you don't have a mental health issue because you're LGBTQ, right? You have a mental health issue and you might also be LGBTQ, and that might have some effect, right? But at the end of the day, once you accept who you are, then you can realize you're not alone. A lot of that stuff kind of helps a lot, right? But just like with the mental health stuff, you have to expect that with your parents. It's not always going to be perfect, and oftentimes it can be very challenging. There's a lot of great resources we have now. Amit mentioned Pooja Mehta, who does a lot of work in YJ and goes to conventions on this issue. There's gay, LGBTQ, South Asian and Asian American organizations. And, a lot of their work is preparing and helping young people get through this process. Right? There can be risks, but ultimately you're not alone, right? Ultimately, this isn't only you. I guarantee you, whoever asked this question, there's somebody else listening to this call or participating in the call who is thinking, oh my gosh, I thought I was the only one. I can't believe there's somebody else. And you're going to encounter that over and over again, right? So ultimately, right, I think it's somewhat of a similar process, right? You have to get to the point where you're comfortable with yourself, right? You're willing to accept it. Right? Until I was willing to accept that I might have depression or I might have anxiety, I wasn't able to make any progress. I wasn't able to get better at all, right? It took friends, people who cared about me to sort of push me to that confrontation. And my decision ultimately, right, to accept that and to face it, that ultimately changed things. So again, people become, if you're discriminated against because of your skin color and that makes you depressed, Doesn't mean you're depressed because you're brown, right? It's really all about, at the end of the day, other people's choices and decisions, their actions that you don't have any control over. But one thing you do have control over is learning to accept yourself for who you are, and learning to build networks of people who also accept you for who you are.
Yeah, and also just on that acceptance standpoint, sort of addressing the aspect of the parents in that question, and or any friends, family members who may be watching, just keep in mind, Jainism is about compassion. If we can have compassion and tolerance for the smallest insect in the air or the ground, we can have compassion and tolerance for our fellow humans. So don't contribute to that problem of disapproval or something. You know, be the compassionate Jain person that you can be, and make someone not feel alone, make them feel, you know, welcome and human. So I think that wraps up the questions that we wanted to go through. If you submitted a question, or if you still have a question that you want to submit in the Google form real quick, we will be uploading the slides afterwards with answers to every single question submitted. But briefly, one thing we did want to touch on was just some ideas on general wellness, because this issue does apply to more than just someone with a formal diagnosis of a mental health issue. It can apply to everyone. So Ramey, do you want to kind of talk about just general wellness?
Definitely. So that's why you'll notice that when I talk about mental health a lot, I don't really use the word mental illness a lot, because I think mental illness causes people to incorrectly focus on only kind of acute situations or chronic disorders, right? All of us, we've been talking a lot about our personal disorders and diagnoses. And so it can lead you to think that, oh, well, mental health is only concerned if I have depression, or if I'm bipolar, or if these kinds of things happen, or if I, have a substance abuse issue, right? That's not true, right? Mental wellness is everyone's job, just like physical wellness. And it's really that dichotomy that somebody made years ago that split mental from physical that's resulted in this kind of disparate treatment, right? So one thing I always tell people, right, just kind of like earlier, Pooja was saying, part of what identifying illness is about is recognizing, hey, being sad is an emotion, and it can be a perfectly rational response to something, but it's different when you're feeling sad for no reason, right? And so it's important to remember that everyone has to work on staying mentally healthy, right? Does anybody, I always ask you this question, does anybody believe if you went through your entire life and you never did a single thing to take care of your body, that you would be in perfect physical health, right? And second question, does anybody believe that even if you took perfect care of yourself and lived the best health lifestyle ever, that you would never get sick or injured in your entire life? We do believe that for mental illness, right? We do. Most of us go through our life never thinking that we have to do anything to take care of our mental health unless something happens, right? But the reality is that's why so many of us are so unprepared. I didn't have the vocabulary to even describe what I was going through until I started to seek help and getting that kind of assistance. Because growing up, I never had that. It wasn't part of my world, right? I couldn't, if you can't assign words to even talk about what you're doing, then how are you going to help yourself, right? So promoting mental wellness as an integral part of what we now call integrated care, right? Integral part of your health is really, really critical. So that means that all of us, we need to recognize that we get stress. We need to monitor. We need to do things to help deal with that stress, right? Whether it's engaging in activities like exercise, meditation, things like that can help you process, talking with somebody, right? I always tell people, you know what, if it wasn't so expensive, I understand the limitation, everybody should have a therapist, literally. I literally think that. I honestly think every single person should have a therapist if it were possible. I know it's not. But there's always that time where we need a sounding board, somebody who's neutral and uninvolved, who can just help talk us through that situation, right? And guess what? Physical and mental symptoms are absolutely linked. You don't get enough sleep, if you don't eat well, if you don't do those things, those can trigger mental symptoms as well, even in people who don't have an underlying chronic condition, right? And vice versa, right? When I have depression, depressive episodes or spells, I have physical symptoms. I have problems with my stomach pains, body aches, headaches, because you actually have a physical response. Like my doctor was telling me, when you're anxious, your body has a fight or flight response. It pulls all the blood into the core of your body, your extremities, you feel chills, you feel all these problems. It interferes with your ability to process normal bodily functions because of that lack of blood flow. All of these things are real, right? So we have to get past this idea that mental and physical health are somehow different things, that mental health is a special thing. It's just part of being healthy, period. So I hope everyone can take away from this that regardless of whether you have a diagnosis, regardless of whether you think you'll ever deal with depression or bipolar disorder or whatever in your entire life, right? You need to prioritize your mental and emotional health. And guess what? When you do that, I always tell people, if I had the choice, I wouldn't live life again without depression. Because with depression, it forced me to become so emotionally mature and to learn tools for dealing with emotions and dealing with other people and resolving conflicts and talking with other people and their emotional states and dealing with these types of situations, traumas, tragedies, etc., disagreements. I never had any of those skill sets. Nobody ever taught me or told me that I needed to learn those things in school. But because of my mental health situation and my experience, I now have those tools and that knowledge, and I would never give up that empathy and that sympathy and that insight I've developed to not just myself, but to better understand and to better forgive other people that I've gotten from this experience.
And to piggyback off of that, for everyone watching this, I want you to leave this and hopefully have educated you a little bit more about mental illness, but I want you to walk away and I want you to really think about your mental wellness. And that could range anywhere from having a disorder to just not being the best you can be. Because like Ramey said, while mental illness only applies to a subset of the population, mental wellness applies to everyone. And I think when talking about this and when you are bringing this up in your community, you can definitely phrase it as, we need to start thinking about our mental wellness rather than, oh, people here have mental illnesses.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and really quick before we wrap up, Amit, did you have any last thing on this point?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, so we're running pretty late, but thank you guys for staying with us. Real quick, with the slides that we're going to post, our speakers have come up with a list of helpful resources, links you can go to, so feel free to sort of peruse those. And also, even with like parents who might have questions or friends and family members who might have questions, if those resources aren't it, you can always reach out to YJ with any questions and we can connect you to the speakers, or we have the 3 speakers' emails that are also going to be posted at the end. So they all say feel free to reach out to them with any questions, concerns, or just sort of general things you want to learn more about. They're great resources, clearly.
Real quick, left off National Asian American Pacific Islander Mental Health Association, NAPIMA. It's just NAPIMA.org. It's just that acronym. Sorry, I did want to just throw this in at some point. I didn't know where to say this. I do want to correct my bio. I don't teach the MBA program at the University of Texas at Austin. I teach business law MBA students at Texas Health and Science University. I used to teach Asian American jurisprudence at UT Austin, but I'm no longer there. And so don't want anyone to come back and say,
so sorry, Ramey.
No, it's not your fault at all, because I used to teach at UT. And then my law firm is actually called the Co Law Firm, PLLC. My old partner, Richard Jung, moved. So it's just the Co Law Firm now.
All right. But yeah, so thank you guys so much for joining. We hope that everyone watching got some good stuff out of this, something you didn't know before. We will be uploading the sort of full version of the slides with all the questions and answers onto the YJ website, so stay tuned for that. And if we have said anything wrong or potentially harmful to anyone, we humbly and sincerely ask for forgiveness and apologize. We say Michami Dukuram. And again, with any questions, feel free to reach out to the speakers at the emails listed. And thank you guys so much for joining. Hope you got something good out of this.
Thank you.
And thank you to the speakers.
So important that you guys are doing this. Really proud of everybody who participated.
Thank you, everyone, for watching. And anyone in our in Chicago data also, feel free to contact me if you need any questions or anything after this.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And hopefully we'll hear from some of you.
Definitely.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Good night.